4, 3, 2. All right, it looks like we are live. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. Our guest speaker is calling from Virginia. She's going to drop a lot of knowledge today, so make sure that you come prepared to be present with us in this hour. I know that we are kings and queens of multitasking, but I want to just extend the invitation to be present with us so that you can participate. I like to start these conversations off by reminding us that lots of crazy things are going on in the world. You could be doing anything else with your time, but you're deciding to be here live with us, or you're deciding to rewatch this intentionally. So with that said, if you're live with us, please participate. You can do that in a number of ways. You can turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. This is a safe digital space. This is one of the things I love doing as a moderator is making sure that people feel comfortable, safe to express themselves however they feel. So turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so, or you can write your pronames if you feel called to do so behind your name as well. You can write in the chat box. You can let us know any ideas, any tips and tricks of your own, any dreams that you've had last night. The key here is we want you to participate. So also, I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout the chat, asking you to hop off mute or write in the chat box whenever you have something to share. So, go ahead and start to get your questions warmed up, or maybe some ideas that you want to share. If you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And then you can rewatch this video later on Power to Fly. You can take notes vigorously there. You can share with your community as well. If anyone has any sensitive information and you prefer to be kept anonymous, you can find me in the chat box under Mariella Marie. You can write to me privately and I will raise your question or your reflection to our guest speaker and keep you anonymous. And the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow us on socials and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store. And if this is your first time participating in a Chat and Learn where I've moderated, just take a couple seconds to introduce myself. My name is Mariella Marie, calling from Patagonia in Argentina, originally from California. I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence in the workplace and at home, so I might bring some of my reflections there. If anyone wants to philosophize with me there, feel free. And I invite you to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. You can go to thepositiveforceteam.org, subscribe to our newsletter, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to chat there. So before I go into introducing our guest speaker, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen a little bit because I know that she has a beautiful story that she wants to kick us off with before we get into, the nuts and bolts of bios and things that we're going to talk about today. So Mellisa, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you so much. So if you all can picture a young, ambitious undergrad who, from what I thought, did all the right things. I attended university, and in preparation for my career, I met with a career coach. Took a look at my resume. I learned all the ins and outs about corporate America, how to dress, how to be presentable at that time, even down to what color suit to wear. And at that time, it was a blue suit. The blue suit would land you the job. And I went into the world of human resources with that knowledge in my back pocket. I went on my very first interview and I knew that I was going to nail this position. I picked out my blue suit and I did my makeup and I put on my heels and I ironed out my hair from its Afro state. And I met with the hiring manager. And the first thing she said to me was, "Why did you iron out your hair?" And I said, "Well, I'm prepared. I've done all the research and I've, met with a coach and, we did mock interviews. And one of the things I thought I needed to do to fit into the culture at that particular organization was to fit into the norm of executive presence. And from my perspective, that was straight hair." And she told me, "Don't you ever do that." She said, "If you have to iron out your hair or change anything about yourself to get an opportunity, then that's not the place for you." And that stuck with me. Yes, snaps, right? That stuck with me my entire career. I didn't get that opportunity, but the very next opportunity, I went in with my big afro. My hair was so big, I had to put on 2 hairnets to walk through the plant. And I landed the position. I landed the position being myself, bringing my whole self to work. And from that day forward, I said, I will never change who I am to get a job. And, that was before anyone introduced the concept of allyship to me. I didn't know anything about being an ally, but that person was a true ally to me in that moment. So I just wanted to share that story. That was my journey into diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's one of the reasons I have such a passion for this. And it's definitely something that shaped me in my career. So who am I? My name is Mellisa Walker. My pronouns are she and her. I am a human resources specialist contractor for the federal government, USAID, based out of Washington, D.C. In my role, I am primarily responsible for performance management. I'm also a member of the Diversity Council. I was recently appointed to that role. I am a career coach for BIPOC women, where I offer guidance on professional development and career progression, working towards their individual goals. I am a certified human resources professional, as well as a certified diversity, equity, and inclusion professional in the workplace. And I also hold a global certification from Howard University in human resource leadership. Next slide.
Yes, I love. Wait, before we move on, I just want to say thank you for sharing that story just before your official introduction. We have Dena who wrote also in the chat box, why did you iron out your hair? Such a profound question and has so much depth. And I really appreciate you kicking off this conversation in that way, because I know that a lot of folks can identify in some way or the other with either having, gone through this process themselves, that kind of awakening, let's call it, or having someone just, stand by you and let you be you regardless of where you are, and expect that you are, if things don't work out, that it wasn't for you because they couldn't accept, your whole totality of who you are as a human being. So thank you so much, Mellisa. I know that this conversation is going to be really enriching. Would love for you to kick us off by talking about the principal themes for today's conversation.
Thank you. So we're going to discuss how to recognize your own biases and work on overcoming those, some best practices for being an effective and committed ally in the workplace, and how to use your position of power to continue to progress anti-oppression in the workplace and your communities.
Awesome. So before we roll into the questions that you all have submitted previous to this conversation, which are fantastic, they're awesome questions, Melissa's going to walk us through a beautiful introduction with a couple of slides, and then we will go into your questions. So if some questions come up as she's presenting, go ahead and write those in the chat box, and when she's finished, I will flag those questions. So we'll start with this slide here and just cue me to go on to the next.
Sure. So before we talk about, how to meet those objectives, those principles, we do need some foundational knowledge. So what is an ally? What are we referring to when we talk about an ally? Well, we're talking about someone who stands up to fight against oppression and against underrepresented groups. And they generally, they're not members of that underrepresented group. They are typically someone with some sort of privilege or position of power. And when we speak about an inner ally, I'm referring to the ally within you that maybe we don't have the knowledge or the courage to step forward into and to lead into. So let's talk about some different types of allies. Next slide. So there are 7 so far recognized types of allies, and maybe you are one of these, maybe you are 5 of these, maybe you are all of these. A sponsor is an ally who boosts a colleague's standing or reputation. It's someone who stands up for a colleague to make them more visible in the workplace. A champion is typically someone who does so in a more public setting, so possibly in a meeting or maybe some sort of reward or recognition. An advocate is someone who brings underrepresented peers into exclusive circles. This could be providing stretch goals or possibly assigning some sort of leadership title or responsibility in order to make this person more visible. Now, the amplifier is probably one of my favorites. They focus on the communication. They make sure voices are heard. Now, why is that one of my favorites? Because as a woman of color, amplifiers have been very important to me in my career. You may or may not know, but when you think back on the history of people of color or Blacks in America, specifically Blacks out of the diaspora, we have traditionally been encouraged not to speak up, not to make eye contact, not to use our voices. And for me, overcoming that in my career has been very something that I've worked towards, and I've had amplifiers in my corner who've helped encourage that. Now, the scholar is someone who seeks to learn and understand without inserting their own opinions or views. That's someone who does their research. They know what they're talking about and they can present facts. The upstander is exactly how it sounds. It's the opposite of a bystander. So that would be someone who calls out injustices and they give pushback. They would call out inappropriate jokes or things that may have been overlooked intentionally or unintentionally. And then the confidant is someone we all need. We're bringing ourselves to work, maybe not our whole selves, but most of ourselves to work, and we all need a safe space to do that. The confidant is someone who is trustworthy. They provide a protective layer of support for employees to really express themselves. So, as we talk about allyship, I think it's important to also address performative allyship. And performative allyship is really based on the idea of self-gratification. It doesn't really look at your responsibility within the workplace or within the community to be an ally. In short, it's disingenuous. One example I can give about performative allyship is a story that a friend shared with me. They are a member of the LGBTQA plus community, and their company participated in all types of activities for Pride. They celebrated Pride. They had all these statements. They had all of this to-do and celebrations. But unfortunately, they didn't take a stance against some of the injustices that members of the trans community face and that members of the gay community face. If you don't know, we do have a federal law. It's an EEOC law that prohibits discrimination against members of the LGBTQA plus community. However, it only applies to certain larger organizations. So if you're a small business under 15 employees, you're not required to follow the EEOC. Companies can make a commitment to follow it in good faith, but there are actually 18 states who still do not have specific laws related to the protection of the rights of gays and trans in the community. Next slide. So what does performative allyship look like in the workplace? It looks like hashtags, it looks like lip service, it looks like a workplace where we don't walk the walk. And you can see that in a lack of diversity and leadership at the top executive levels of a corporation. If you don't have KPIs in place to measure the outcomes, measure progression as it relates to inclusion. And there's no real true commitment to the follow through in goals or in policies Violators of diversity policies may not be held accountable, and this can certainly impact morale in the workplace. Next slide. Some of the other impacts of the lack of fostering lack of fostering a culture where allyship is inclusive. Well, you have employees who are more likely to leave. They're demotivated. It can impact their performance. It can certainly impact their willingness or wanting to come to work. They take more sick days. But if you do have an inclusive workforce, your employees are 167% more likely to recommend your organization as a good place to work. And these metrics were taken from hrdrive.com. So one of the biggest questions, next slide, that I've been asked leading up to this discussion is, Mellisa, what do you mean by allyship versus co-conspirators? What is a co-conspirator? Well, a co-conspirator is someone who's in it with you. Allies are wonderful, but a co-conspirator says, we're in this together. You don't just need me, we need each other. So it's about supporting versus participating. It's about working as a team rather than you need me and I don't need you. It's about speaking up and being an anti-racist and an anti-ageist and someone who speaks out against injustices related to all protected classes. Next slide. So what are some tips, some learning tips we can use to encourage these learning conversations? And I'm using the term learning intentionally rather than courageous conversations or uncomfortable conversations. We can use these tools to learn from one another and work together as co-conspirators. There are power in numbers. So find someone who's on your side. Find someone who you can rely on to speak up with you. Use your position of privilege to push the agenda, push the right things. When you're talking and making statements and you're having these conversations, make sure that the language you use is not accusatory. Use statements like I. When you say that, I feel uncomfortable. When you do that, I feel excluded. Don't assume someone else's intentions. This is where understanding comes into play. Have conversations that lead to learning. When you do that, make sure you bring the facts also. There are ways that you can research and bring statistics, bring education. You can also look up reviews from your company online to see what others have to say who have maybe left the company or even just interviewed with the company. Thank people for listening and for talking. We all want to feel appreciated. So make sure that you are open when listening and being thoughtful when you're having these conversations. Understand the difference between intent and impact. We all have our intentions and we assume positive intent, but impact outweighs intent. So if you're having a conversation and someone is offended, even if we didn't mean to offend them, the impact outweighs the intent. We're not expected to know it all. There are situations where maybe you need to take a step back and ask, I don't know how I feel about that just yet. Let me think about it. When someone comes to you, maybe they said, I'm offended by what you said. This is how it made me feel. It's okay to say, let me think about that. I'm not quite sure how to respond and come back to the conversation later. Ask how you can work together on a solution. I've offended you. How can we move forward? What would you like to see happen in the future? The golden rule is great, but the platinum rule is even better. And that is to treat others the way they want to be treated. Also, when you're having these conversations, be open to feedback. It's so easy because we take things so personal. So it's so easy to step into the defensive mode. But it's important to leave those communication lines open and be open to not always being right. And you don't have to always be right. You don't have to be perfect. We're all learning together. So what would I love for you to take away today? I would love for you to shift the conversation stance from, next slide, from a learning, shift your conversations to a learning stance, understanding stance. Speak up and show up and start really, trying to understand one another. So that being said, I'm ready for questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much for setting the stage. I'm so grateful for you for sharing your story and also for extending the invitation that this is a learning curve and there's really no final destination to this learning curve. We have so much unlearning to do while we learn. So I just love how you have set the stage for these questions. So we are actually going to dive into the questions that you all have submitted previous to the conversation. If you hear your question come up and you're live with us, just let us know you're here. You can do that by raising your emoji hand or giving any kind of emoji praise, or you can just let us know in the chat box that that was your question. If you don't hear your question come up, but you do have a question, like I said in the beginning, please drop those in the chat box or feel free to hop off mute because we want to hear from you today. All right, so let's start with this first question here. Can you expand on the idea and importance of co-conspirators in this work?
Yes, the co-conspirators, it's a part of being an ally, so it's not exclusive, right? So being a co-conspirator, it really says that we're in this together. It's more about needing one another and less about, a one-sided relationship.
Beautiful. And I love the way that you are presenting that. I think as we are learning how to really practice what we preach and expect that from our employers and expect that just in the industry in general, we have the slide said it so clearly, lip service, hashtags. I think even stock images, portray this is what's happening inside, but really you walk inside and that's not really happening. So to be co-conspirators, it just takes it a level further. And in my opinion, it makes it a little more holistic too, because then we're stronger together, right? We
Exactly.
don't just expect from someone else, or we aren't just, trying to be self-righteous and share our privilege without understanding where we can go together. So I just love this philosophy of co-conspirators. Thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to this next question here. Would the cultural cohort type of unique learning opportunity help push the dialogue on allyship, or would this hurt any progress the organization has made toward allyship?
Absolutely. And that's really what it's all about. It's about learning from one another and understanding one another. Take the time to ask questions and be curious. A cohort designed specifically to really understand the differences that we have can really bring us together, bring together that divergent thinking. But it also allows us to know and understand that we're more alike than we are unalike, right? To quote Maya Angelou. So absolutely, take the time and we've done that in the workplace. We've taken the time to learn different cultures, to learn different religions, to learn different traditions, and it really brings the organization together. And it also encourages employees to bring their whole selves to work and to know that they can be comfortable with that, without fear of, being singled out. So I absolutely encourage because learning one another helps create that culture of inclusivity.
Beautifully said. We actually have some comments here in the chat box. I love the notion of investment on both sides of the relationship. You don't walk away from things you're invested in. Absolutely. Did you want to comment on that, Melissa?
Thank you, Dina. That's my best friend.
Ah, Dina. There you go. Represent. I love that. All right. So let's move on to this next question here. Is it biased if I want to hire those from underrepresented groups instead of those who may have or be perceived to have more privilege?
Yes, we get this question so often. And the short answer is um, possibly, right? Because that's the answer we love to give in HR. The answer is possibly. You know, the idea really is to bring a diverse slate of candidates to the table and then choose the most qualified candidate. So it's not about choosing someone who is unqualified because they're a member of an underprivileged group. It's about making sure that we have representation from all sorts of backgrounds and all sorts of demographics, so that we're giving everyone an opportunity. So possibly. Mm-hmm.
And the word possibly just leaves things open, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
this polarized yes, no, black, white, left, right. It leaves room, it leaves space for new things to occur and for growth to happen in a different way. So I really love that image that calls to mind as well. So great. Let's move on to this next question here. And actually, you've already given some examples, but I would love for you to just dive deeper as this question is requesting of you. Can you give some examples of true allyship versus performative allyship?
So we talked about one. Um, I would say another example of true allyship would be in the workplace. You know, in my previous role, and I recently started this role with the federal government. But prior to this role, I was a consultant, and in that role, we had opportunities to support one another through courageous conversations and learning. And one great, I think, example of allyship that was displayed by our CEO was her support during the times where we were all feeling a lot of sadness surrounding the murder of George Floyd. And during that time, she did take the time to encourage us to support one another, to take time, because we were going through, as a country, sort of a cycle of perpetual grief, right? So she definitely took that time from her position to make sure that we felt supported, and not just by talk, but also by giving us time and resources to help us heal through that process. Now, the opposite of that would be making a statement and then doing nothing, right? So that's an example of performative allyship. And companies are being called out for performative allyship. And some companies are even being held accountable for reporting policies related to diversity and inclusion and not adhering to those policies, things that have been presented to their board of directors and then later not followed up on. And there's been actual litigation for falsifying information related to diversity and inclusion to gain contracts and position in corporate America. So you have to be careful there as well.
And actually, that brings more hope to just my understanding of like, the state of humanity is this like, how do we get here and where can we go? So I love that we are holding these companies accountable. I mean, as slowly but surely, it is a big beast to fight. But I think that through these small wins, we can encourage each other to, you know, maybe be that person that says you don't need to stay here if you don't have to. Let me help you find some more solutions because of course people have to pay for their lives, and so maybe they feel pigeonholed to stay in a place that doesn't respect them or doesn't listen to their voice. And especially during this global pandemic, it makes things pretty restricted. So I love that even now we are having people stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, this is not another thing you can exploit. This is real,
Exactly.
and you need to. I love that you even put the word heal in that, because I don't know that the word heal came up in the workplace or speaking about the workplace, 10 years ago, or even just a couple of years ago. So things are changing, and I really appreciate the work you're doing, Mellisa.
Thank you.
All right, let's move to this next question here. What's the best way to start conversations around recognizing our own unconscious biases?
That's a great question. I would say, some people don't recognize their biases. And I think it's important to, one, talk about the different types of biases. I think one bias that we can all relate to is an affinity bias. So, having some conversation around the different types of biases, and then also taking the time to take the implicit association test by Harvard. I think that most people would be very surprised at their results after taking that assessment. So I encourage employees and leaders to take the implicit association test. And then also, you take a look at if you don't have the resources to have someone come out and train, or you don't have the resources internally to have someone train, you can always hire an outside consultant to do that. And there are lots of very useful TED Talks related to that topic as well. One that comes to mind is Outsmarting Your Own Unconscious Bias. That's a really great one. I encourage you to take a look.
And I just want to highlight the importance of this. I spoke with a woman about a couple months ago, a woman in Kenya whose conversation centered around is artificial intelligence discriminatory? And she immediately goes to speaking about how, unconscious bias exists. And if people are building technology without confronting or at least approaching and trying to heal their unconscious biases that our society has amplified, essentially, then we're in a big loop of trouble. So this is just my plea. If anyone's working in technology, of course, in any field, but especially technology, because it is really fast, it can reach, globally. Please find the resources. As Mellisa said, there are free resources. And I think that the best thing we can do, Mellisa, I would love to know if you agree with this, is to make sure that we are checking ourselves, maybe put some points, some checkpoints in our own personal calendars. How do we come far? How far have we come this week? What have we worked on to try to, dissect and really work through these biases that we have unknowingly, so that we can do better in the workplace and so that we can be better to the global community at large.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing exercise, really, to recognize your biases and work to counter them. So, absolutely.
And Sean is asking, is there a link to the test? What was the name again? So can you say the name one more time? And then I'll say, for those who are watching live, you're going to get a rewatch email with links to the resources that Mellisa is speaking about today. So if you're not there, but Mellisa, can you remind us the name of the test again?
Yes, it's the implicit association test by Harvard.
Great. All right. So again, if anyone's live with us and wants to hop off mute, feel free to do so. Just let me know by writing in the chat box, or just go for it and hop off mute. You can do it. I believe in you. I know that folks are chewing on a lot of things that we're talking about today, so I want to make sure that your voice is being heard. Until then, let's move on to this next question here. Are there any internal biases that are more common or universal?
Yeah, I think I mentioned affinity bias is one that is really common and one that most people accept. And when we say bias, sometimes we think of the negative connotations, but affinity bias is really a bias for a person based on commonalities. So it could be someone who attended your university, or shares an affiliation. It could be someone who, you enjoy golf and they enjoy golf. So you could have a bias for someone as well.
All right, let's move on to the next question here. Do you recommend any specific resources or research terms where we can use to help educate ourselves and/or our employees?
Yeah, I think all companies should really know and educate employees about unconscious bias, microaggressions, and now we're starting to talk about macroaggressions as well. I think it's important to talk about intersectionality. If you don't have business resource groups at your current companies or organizations, that's something you'll, possibly want to take a look at. I recommend looking into that. We used to call them employee resource groups, but we're now starting to refer to them as business resource groups, or BRGs, if you hear that term. There's been a lot of talk about racism and sexism, but we're starting to talk more about being an ableist. So that's a term to really know and consider as it relates to discrimination against those with different abilities, not disabilities, different abilities. You can also research the 7 pillars of diversity and really take a dive into what type of earmarks you can develop for your organization as it relates to access, the attitudes about diversity, the choices that different demographics have, partnerships that you participate in, vendor relationships, the way you communicate, looking at policies beyond compliance, and the opportunities that you have for your employees. Mm-hmm.
All right. So that might seem like a lot to throw at someone who might be trying to, I mean, all of this is great. What is something that someone can just take a deep breath in and start right after this conversation to present to, their team or to the leaders at their company?
I mean, one of the most common places people start is recruiting, right? So you could take a look at your recruiting efforts, the sourcing that you have at your organization, and to make sure that you are looking in the right places to ensure a diverse workforce.
Yes. Go out into those neighborhoods. Don't expect them to come to you where they maybe charge $50 for parking, because you're not going to get what you're looking for. Okay, so let's move on. That's a whole nother topic that I know we can probably dive into.
Talk.
All right, let's move on to this next question here. My workplace has been talking a big game about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging goals, but there's been little to no planning or progress since last summer, fall. How can I raise this issue with HR so this doesn't continue to just be lip service?
Ask for updates. If you're in a position where you can ask for updates, ask for the status. Ask if there is a cadence. Are there regular check-ins? How are you measuring this? Ask the questions. Once you start asking the questions, a lot of times we just want to know, let them know we're paying attention. So, ask for, information related to the progress, what they're measuring, if, when is the next meeting. A great way to hold organizations accountable is to make it a requirement to provide updates to your leadership team or even your board of directors on a regular cadence.
Beautiful tips there. So definitely, I echo those sentiments. I encourage you all to be that little buzzing fly that's, maybe it's an annoyance for someone, but it is so necessary to check in, remind, we talked about this, we're posting this, how's the progress, and actually I would love to hear your opinion on this, Mellisa. Where's the line between, extending to support and offer your time and energy to get some initiatives started? Because I feel like now there are people who are having to take on a whole nother role, a whole nother job to bring in this DEI effort when, I guess, different people in leadership aren't really helping that be put into practice. So I see this isn't happening. I already have a full load, but I know that this needs to happen. So I give you more time. And then that leads to burnout and resentment because you have basically 2 jobs to do in one. And this isn't something that you're necessarily trained in. So I would love to just hear you to dive in there a little bit.
Yeah. And, that adds to burnout, but also this question that was just asked about not seeing any progress, and you're spinning your wheels and you don't see the results, that also leads to burnout. We're seeing now more companies offering incentives to participate in these BRGs or with these initiatives. They're offering possibly spot bonuses and a bump in salary because many times these are volunteer positions. But if you aren't able to offer that, you can also offer a performance, an aspect of the performance review as it relates to their participation. It's important also for the individual to have those boundaries, right? So you still have your primary responsibilities and you're held accountable for those responsibilities. And unfortunately, we can't do it all, right? So I would certainly keep track of everything I'm doing, the time it takes, and it could be a matter of a proposal and some time to say, listen, I've spent X amount of time on this. This is the amount of energy and effort that I've put into this. I've researched the market and I've found that roles like this typically are paid X with this responsibility. And I would like to request an increase.
Lots of learning moments. Comfortable, but to change that to a learning conversation instead of an uncomfortable conversation, just to jump out of the gate and say, this is the research that I'm doing to show you, so that we can practice our boundary setting more, because I know, especially with these sorts of topics of development, we want to give, well, not all of us, unfortunately, but a lot of us want to give our whole, like our hearts, and we want to overgive sometimes, and that just creates more of a sticky situation. So I just love the advice to, do some research and show, this is what I need in order to feel that I'm being seen, and that, my value is being appreciated as well, that I'm giving to this DEI effort. So I appreciate that highlight. So let's move on to this next question here. How can I best use my position of authority at work to jumpstart our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it really depends on where you are in the journey. We can go back to what we were talking about before regarding the 7 types of allies. So, are you at a mature state where you can start to develop KPIs and follow through with those? Are you in a stage where you really need to assess what's needed, starting with a diversity and inclusion assessment? But based on your position, possibly you're a sponsor, or maybe you're someone who sponsors a business resource group. But, again, it depends, right? We love that answer.
I think the core value there is just to take a step forward, so don't just, because I know it can be scary for a lot of people. Am I going to say the wrong thing? How do I make sure that I'm going to, be fully committed if I bring this up? And it's such new territory, unfortunately, because this is a conversation that, has been in the works for years, for centuries. So it's new territory. And so having to have that, you said, instead of using the word courageous, to have that, that learning hue, which I think adds a little grace and less of this perfectionist approach, right? Like, you might not have all the answers. You probably don't. We're not perfectionists. I mean, we are taught to be, but the reality is we are all human. So I think that if we can just focus on taking one step forward in the direction, and hold hands with people who can support us, we're going to make some moves, right? So just to not stay within that safe, comfortable zone of like, well, somebody else is going to take care of it.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to this next question here. Is it important to have examples set at the most visible levels of leadership, or to have a groundswell of employees support these new programs?
Hmm. When I was in high school, many, many, many moons ago, I had a teacher who taught economics, and he talked about some aspects of psychology as it relates to economics. And one thing he told us was that you can dream about many things, but you cannot dream about something you've never seen. Meaning, if you have never seen the Statue of Liberty, you will not have a real picture of what the Statue of Liberty looks like in your dreams. And I say that because it is important to show, it is important to demonstrate and to give real examples of what good looks like and what the desired state looks like. So absolutely, I definitely agree. I think that they are equally important. I think that you need both. They complement one another. So visibility is absolutely key.
Absolutely, I agree. I have a private message here speaking about corporate board diversity that continues to be in the news. Does
Mhm.
Mellisa have any thoughts on this? Was this born out of DEI efforts?
Um, yes, the short answer to that is yes, right? Um, it's been proven time and time again that I think it's something to the tune of like 42%. When you talk about a return on your investment, when you have diversity in top leadership and on your board, your return on your investments it's about a 42% increase, right, in revenue. And so that's absolutely a driver because we're in business to make money. Um, but to that end, it's also important from the social aspect and what it says about an organization when they don't have diversity in those top roles. I have been certainly one who has passed on an opportunity because they didn't have diversity in leadership or on the board of directors. Because again, it's important to see as an employee that that's attainable for me. So I do think that that is something that derives from this push for diversity, inclusion, and equity in the workplace.
Awesome. Thank you for submitting that private question. And thank you, Mellisa, for diving in deep there. All right. So we've got about 11 minutes before we wrap up this conversation. So I just want to hold for a light pause to see if someone wants to hop off mute to voice their question or reflection. I'll give you a moment here. If you would like, please do so now. Sometimes this works.
Everyone's
Sometimes
shy.
everyone's shy today or multitasking with a bunch of tabs open, researching all the beautiful things Melissa's talking about, not researching anything else. All right. Otherwise, I've got some more questions here, but I just wanted to give space for folks who might want to jump off mute. So, Mellisa, let's roll into some more questions here. And we've got, like I said, about 10 minutes left. So if you're here with us, you've got time to drop in the chat or to hop off mute. Okay. My organization has literally zero diversity. How can I effectively convince coworkers and management that we need to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts when it seemingly doesn't impact or matter to anyone else here?
Mm. You know how they say, show me the money, bring the facts. Bring the facts. There are numerous studies and statistics that you can bring to your organization to really demonstrate the impact that lack of diversity has within an organization, from creativity to retention. I mean, there are all types of statistics. And if you have access to key metrics within your organization, I would present those as well to your leadership team. I mentioned before, you can look at reviews on companies like Glassdoor to see what those who are with the company or who have left the company have to say. And there could be information there that you could find useful in a presentation to really show, the impact of the lack of diversity that you have. I've been there. I've worked at an organization many moons ago who did not have an appetite for discussions surrounding diversity and inclusion. And today they've changed their tune because it can be proven many times over the impact and the return on the investment that a company will receive once they focus in on ensuring diversity at all levels. And sometimes companies think, well, we're diverse. We have lots of employees who are from many different backgrounds, but sometimes those employees don't have a seat at the table. So that's not true inclusion. So I say, bring the facts and show them the money.
Yes, I love that. Put that on a shirt. Wear that to your next DEI conference, everyone. Make sure people are practicing what they're preaching.
Exactly.
All right. So if I only learn one thing from this chat today, what should it be?
It should be that as it relates to allyship, use your own position of power. You determine what type of ally you would like to be and what type of ally you need. Not everyone is going to be on the front lines at a, Black Lives Matter protest. Not everyone, is in a position to change laws that will impact the trans community. So if your position of power is that you can highlight inequalities to close gaps, do that. If you see that, there's no place for mothers to pump, raise the question. If you know you have a colleague who needs alcohol-free events, and at all the events, we, serve alcohol, raise your hand. If you, see that someone is visually impaired and the presentations are, in a font and color that's difficult to read, these are all things that anyone can do to step up. Well, we shouldn't say step up. We should say move up because, we're being inclusive in our communication. So in order to move up, move the agenda forward, and be a true ally.
Beautifully said. And I love that you just went back on what you said, because like you started this conversation with, this is a learning curve. And one of the things I love reflecting on personally and sharing whenever I have the opportunity is that language is so important. So something as simple as saying step up and changing that to move forward or move up has a completely different visual, and it is more inclusive, and it is, less of this, I call it colonized version of communication. So thank you for practicing that with me today, Mellisa. We didn't even talk about this, but clearly we are on the same page. I
We're
love
all
that.
learning. Yes.
Okay, so we've got about 4 more minutes here, 5 more minutes. We have a private question, so let's see. Hopefully we have time for this. I'll read it out loud here. Mm-hmm. Our organization is not racially diverse. We are working on that, but we are diverse in other ways. For example, age, gender, LGBTQ plus, etc. What are some ways we can show, in quotation marks, that we are diverse to those outside of our organizations that might only focus on race?
You can show just that, even in the visuals when you're on your website. I've seen organizations post, if you can, sometimes there are privacy issues, but pictures of real people, real people within your organization who are from different, demographics. You can certainly celebrate those things through different, there are all types of, I think we have a celebration for everything here in the US. I'm not, I'm not sure about there, but there's a celebration for everything almost. So making sure that you take the time to celebrate differences. You can certainly demonstrate it in the type of community service endeavors you support, and where you give your philanthropic donations. You can celebrate it, through communication and education. There are so many different ways you can communicate that you value all types of diversity. Yeah.
I love that. And I really appreciate this private question, because I know that you aren't alone in that. So thank you for posing this question live. So we've got about 5 more minutes. I know before I said 4, so I gave some time there. I don't know how that happened. Okay. So, and it's great because we've got one more question here on the list. How can I bring authenticity and sincerity to these conversations when I'm still very new to this issue?
So you can learn, right? You can listen, you can ask questions, you can conduct research on your own. Last year, I participated in an anti-racist forum here through the Leadership Greater Washington organization here in the DC area. And one of the things they asked us to do was to decide how we were going to challenge ourselves to not stop here. And what I decided was that I wanted to learn about the Jewish community. So what did I do? I went and talked to colleagues who I knew were Jewish, and I asked questions, and I asked for recommendations for books, and I asked for recommendations for other resources, and they gave me everything. They gave me movies to watch, and they recommended recipes and all types of things to help me really deepen that knowledge of that particular religion. So, if from an authentic place with sincerity, ask the questions, and be open to understand and to learn.
Beautiful. So you set the stage so beautifully. You were able to dive deep on even your personal experiences and sharing, some of these touchy private questions that are, that resonate with a lot of us. So thank you so much, Mellisa, for your time. Can you leave us with some more food for thought? Something that, we can start doing right now when we end this conversation, to take that first move forward, and then remind us how we can connect with you, either on social media or wherever you prefer to be connected with. Let us know that as well.
Sure. I will leave you with this, and it's a reiteration really of something that I've already said, which is um, lead from your hearts. When we're going along this journey, none of us know it all. We're learning as we go. But if you lead from your heart, you can almost never go wrong. So leading from your heart and listen to understand instead of defend with an open heart. And I'll say that you can reach me on LinkedIn at Mellisa T. Walker. I'm also on my website, missiewalker.com, MISSIEWARW. I can't even spell my name, MISSIEWALKER.com, or you can email me at contact@missiewalker.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. You've dropped a lot of knowledge. I'm really happy that we had a lot of engagement as well from folks writing in the chat box. So I definitely encourage everyone to reach out to Mellisa. If you have any questions that come up after this conversation, I'm sure she would be happy to receive those questions and reflections from you. And of course, support the great work that she's doing. So we'll see you all on the next Chat and Learn. Take care. Remember to bring your heart to the table, and also set your boundaries so that you don't overgive and you can protect yourself. So thank you so much,
Absolutely.
Mellisa.
Thank you.